There is a strange moment that happens in almost every life. You can be surrounded by people, surrounded by noise, surrounded by distractions, and still feel completely alone. You wake up one morning and something feels different. You don't know exactly what it is. Maybe you're tired of pretending everything is fine. Maybe you're exhausted from giving your energy to people who never give anything back. Maybe you've been working towards something for months or years, and you're beginning to wonder whether any of it matters. There are moments in life when a message seems to arrive at exactly the right time. Not yesterday, not next month, not when everything was comfortable. It appears when your mind is already carrying questions you haven't been able to answer. You may have been scrolling without looking for anything specific, distracted from your own thoughts, trying to escape the pressure building inside you, and then suddenly you see something that makes you stop. You don't know why you clicked. You don't know why those particular words caught your attention. But something about them feels strangely relevant to where you are right now. Maybe that's because timing matters more than people realize. The same sentence can mean absolutely nothing to you one year and completely change the way you see your life the next. The information didn't change. You changed. Your circumstances changed. Your level of awareness changed. You became ready to understand something that you weren't ready to understand before. Think about how many lessons you've encountered in your life that you ignored the first time. Someone warned you about a person and you dismissed it. Someone told you to slow down and you kept rushing. Someone told you that you were accepting less than you deserved and you defended the situation. You heard the words, but they didn't penetrate because your mind had already decided what it wanted to believe. Then something happened. A relationship ended. A plan failed. Someone betrayed your trust. An opportunity disappeared. You spent enough time repeating the same pattern that eventually you couldn't ignore it anymore. Suddenly, the advice you once rejected sounded completely different. The words had not changed. Your perception had. This is why you should never underestimate the moment you're currently experiencing. You may think you're simply going through another difficult period, another confusing chapter, another stretch of uncertainty. But there may be information inside this moment that you could never have understood while everything was going smoothly. Pain has a way of removing distractions. When everything is comfortable, you can avoid yourself. You can stay busy. You can keep entertaining yourself. You can surround yourself with people. You can convince yourself that everything is fine. But when something disrupts your normal routine, you suddenly have to confront the thoughts you've been avoiding. And that's when certain messages begin to hit differently. You hear something about discipline, and suddenly you recognize how often you've been choosing comfort. You hear something about boundaries, and suddenly you realize how many times you've betrayed your own needs to keep other people happy. You hear something about self-respect, and suddenly you see how often you've been waiting for someone else to give you what you should have given yourself. The timing becomes important because awareness without readiness rarely produces change. You can know exactly what you need to do and still refuse to do it. You can understand the problem and still protect the habit. You can recognize the wrong person and still keep returning. You can know that you need to move forward and still spend months looking backward until something inside you changes. That change often begins quietly. It might be a single thought that refuses to leave you alone, a sentence that keeps repeating in your head, a realization that makes your old behavior feel impossible to justify. You begin noticing things you previously overlooked. You start seeing patterns instead of isolated events. You stop asking why something happened once and start asking why the same thing keeps happening. That is, when a message becomes more than a message, it becomes a mirror. And sometimes you don't like what the mirror shows you. But seeing it is still progress, because you cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot rebuild your life around a reality you refuse to see clearly. Maybe you've been waiting for a sign that it's time to change. Maybe you've been waiting for certainty before making a decision. But certainty rarely comes first. Action often creates certainty. You move first, and clarity catches up later. So if something in these words feels unusually personal right now, don't immediately dismiss that feeling. Pay attention to it. Ask yourself why these words matter to you today when they might not have mattered 6 months ago. Maybe you're finally tired enough to change. Maybe you've lost enough to understand what actually matters. Maybe you've become aware enough to recognize the pattern. Maybe you've reached the point where continuing the same way has become more painful than changing. Pain has a strange way of becoming louder when you keep running from it. You can distract yourself, stay busy, surround yourself with people, consume endless information, and convince yourself that you're fine. But the things you refuse to face don't disappear. They simply wait. And eventually, they begin showing up in your reactions, your relationships, your decisions, and the way you see yourself. Most people don't actually want to understand their pain. They want it gone. They want the discomfort removed as quickly as possible. The moment something hurts, they search for something that will make them feel better. They call someone, open an app, go somewhere, start another relationship, work longer hours, or create some new distraction. Anything that prevents them from sitting quietly with what is happening inside them. But pain isn't always the enemy. Sometimes pain is information. It tells you that something matters. It reveals where your boundaries have been crossed. It exposes the difference between what you say you want and what you continue accepting. It shows you where you're attached, where you're afraid, where you're dependent, and where you've been lying to yourself. Imagine touching a hot surface and feeling pain. The pain isn't the problem. The pain is the warning system. It tells you to move your hand before something worse happens. Emotional pain can work the same way. It can signal that you're living in a situation that no longer fits you, repeating a behavior that is damaging you, or holding on to something that you already know you need to release. The problem begins when you silence the signal instead of investigating it. You lose someone and immediately replace them. You fail and immediately blame someone else. You feel rejected and immediately search for validation. You become lonely and immediately return to people you already know are wrong for you. You feel uncertain and immediately look for someone to tell you what to do. The discomfort disappears temporarily, but the lesson remains unfinished, and unfinished lessons have a tendency to repeat themselves. You may notice the same kind of relationship appearing again and again. Different person, same emotional pattern. Different environment, same frustration. Different opportunity, same self-sabotage. You keep wondering why life keeps giving you the same problem when sometimes the deeper issue is that you keep responding to the problem in the same way. This is why difficult periods can become powerful turning points. They force you to examine what comfort allowed you to ignore. When you're comfortable, you can tolerate almost anything. When you're uncomfortable enough, you start asking better questions. Why am I still here? Why do I keep accepting this? Why am I afraid to leave? Why do I need this person's approval? Why do I keep breaking promises to myself? Why am I chasing something that doesn't choose me? Those questions can hurt, but they can also return your power. Because once you understand the pattern, you can interrupt it. You don't need to hate the people who hurt you. You don't need revenge. You don't need to prove that they were wrong. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply learning enough that you never have to experience the same lesson in the same way again. Pain becomes valuable when it produces awareness. Awareness becomes valuable when it produces action, and action becomes transformation when you repeat it long enough to create a new identity. Maybe you've been trying to become stronger by avoiding everything that makes you uncomfortable. But strength isn't created by eliminating difficulty. Strength is created by learning that you can face difficulty without abandoning yourself. You can sit with rejection without begging someone to reconsider. You can experience loneliness without running back to the wrong people. You can fail without deciding that you're a failure. You can lose someone without losing yourself. You can feel fear without allowing fear to make every decision. You can experience uncertainty without demanding immediate answers. That is a different kind of strength. It doesn't make you emotionless. It makes you less controlled by your emotions. And there is an important distinction between feeling something and obeying it. You can feel anger without acting recklessly. You can feel insecurity without seeking constant reassurance. You can feel sadness without destroying your future. You can feel fear without turning around. Your emotions can give you information without becoming your commander. The next time something hurts, don't immediately ask how to make the feeling disappear. Ask what the feeling is trying to show you. Maybe it's showing you that a boundary is overdue. Maybe it's showing you that you're exhausted from pretending. Maybe it's showing you that you've outgrown an environment. Maybe it's showing you that you're trying to control something that was never yours. Maybe it's showing you that you're still attached to a version of your life that no longer exists. One of the biggest sources of frustration in life is trying to control things that were never yours to control. You spend hours thinking about what someone said, why they said it, what they might do next, whether they still care, whether they understand you, whether they will change, whether they will come back, whether they will finally recognize your value. You replay conversations, predict outcomes, imagine different scenarios, and mentally fight battles that haven't even happened. Meanwhile, the one thing you actually control, your own response, gets pushed into the background. You cannot control another person's thoughts. You cannot control their loyalty. You cannot control whether they appreciate you. You cannot control whether they misunderstand you. You cannot control whether someone chooses you. You cannot control what happened yesterday. And you cannot control whether the world gives you exactly what you think you deserve. The sooner you accept this, the more energy becomes available for the things that actually belong to you. Your attention belongs to you. Your decisions belong to you. Your standards belong to you. Your effort belongs to you. Your boundaries belong to you. Your response belongs to you. That distinction can completely change the way you move through life. Think about how much energy disappears when you try to convince someone to understand you. You explain yourself again and again. You give more details. You defend your intentions. You try to prove that you weren't wrong. But sometimes the other person has already decided what they want to believe. No amount of explanation will change it. And that's where people lose themselves. They confuse being understood with being validated. They believe they need everyone to see their side before they can feel at peace. But peace cannot depend on another person's interpretation of you. Someone can misunderstand you, and you can still know who you are. Someone can dislike you, and you can still respect yourself. Someone can walk away, and you can still continue forward. Someone can reject you, and you can still refuse to reject yourself. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to everyone. It means learning where your responsibility ends. You can communicate clearly. You can apologize when you're wrong. You can correct your behavior. You can make your intentions known. But after you've done your part, you have to release the outcome. Otherwise, you're giving other people control over your emotional state. If they respond positively, you're happy. If they respond negatively, you're devastated. If they approve, you feel valuable. If they criticize, you question yourself. If they stay, you feel secure. If they leave, you feel empty. That isn't emotional freedom. That's dependence disguised as attachment. Real strength begins when your internal state becomes less dependent on external reactions. You still notice what happens. You still care. You still feel. but you stop allowing every external event to dictate who you become. Imagine someone insulting you. Your first instinct may be to respond immediately. You want to defend yourself. You want them to know they crossed a line. You want the last word. But ask yourself what happens when you react automatically. You give them control over your behavior. They press a button and you move. They provoke you and you respond. They disappear, and you chase. They criticize, and you defend. They withdraw, and you panic. They return, and you forget everything. Your behavior becomes predictable because someone else has learned which emotional triggers control you. The alternative is not weakness. The alternative is pause. You observe. You decide. You choose your response instead of surrendering it to impulse. Sometimes the strongest response is action. Sometimes it is silence. Sometimes it is a boundary. Sometimes it is walking away. And sometimes it is simply refusing to spend another hour thinking about something that cannot be changed. Your past is another place where control disappears. You can analyze yesterday forever, but you cannot rewrite it. You can regret the decision. You can wish you had acted differently. You can imagine another outcome, but the past does not negotiate. What happened happened. Your responsibility now is not to change history. Your responsibility is to extract the lesson. If you made a mistake, learn from it. If you trusted the wrong person, become more discerning. If you wasted time, become more intentional. If you ignored a warning, become more attentive. If you failed, become more capable. The past becomes useful when you stop trying to live inside it. The same principle applies to the future. You can plan, prepare, and work toward an outcome, but you cannot guarantee it. There will always be variables outside your control. So focus on what can be done today. One action, one decision, one improvement, one boundary, one promise kept. The mind becomes calmer when it stops demanding certainty from an uncertain world. You don't need to know exactly how everything will turn out. You need to know what you are going to do next. That is enough. Control your effort. Control your attention. Control your standards. Control your response. Control what you repeatedly expose yourself to. Control what you allow into your environment. Control the promises you make to yourself, and release everything else. There is a point in your life when you realize that needing everyone's approval has been quietly controlling your decisions. You may not notice it at first because it doesn't look like control. It looks like being nice. It looks like being respectful. It looks like keeping the peace. It looks like caring about what people think. But underneath it, there can be a constant fear of disappointing someone, being misunderstood, rejected, criticized, or left behind. You start changing your behavior depending on who is watching. You say yes when you want to say no. You stay quiet when something bothers you. You laugh at things you don't find funny. You hide your ambitions because you're afraid someone will judge them. You avoid making decisions because you're already imagining what everyone else will say. Eventually, you stop asking yourself what you actually want. You start asking, what will they think? That question can become a prison. The need for approval is powerful because humans naturally want connection. We want to belong. We want to feel accepted. There is nothing wrong with that. The problem begins when belonging becomes more important than self-respect. When you constantly need approval, you give other people the authority to define your value. One compliment can make you feel powerful. One criticism can destroy your confidence. One person's rejection can make you question everything about yourself. One person's acceptance can make you tolerate behavior you would normally never accept. Your emotional state becomes dependent on external reactions, and that makes you vulnerable. You become easy to influence because anyone who knows exactly what you fear can use that fear to guide your behavior. But there is another way to live. You can care what people think without being controlled by what they think. You can listen without obeying. You can consider criticism without allowing it to become your identity. You can accept advice without surrendering your judgment. And most importantly, you can disappoint people without believing you've done something wrong. This is a difficult skill because people often reward you for being agreeable. When you make everyone comfortable, people may call you kind. When you constantly sacrifice yourself, people may call you generous. When you never challenge anyone, people may call you easygoing. But sometimes what looks like kindness is actually fear. You're not saying yes because you want to help. You're saying yes because you're afraid of what happens if you say no. You're not staying silent because you're peaceful. You're staying silent because confrontation scares you. You're not constantly available because you have endless energy. You're available because you're afraid that becoming unavailable will make people leave. Once you recognize the difference, your behavior begins to change. You start understanding that boundaries are not punishments. They are instructions for how you expect to be treated. You don't need to become aggressive. You don't need to become cold. You don't need to start treating people badly just because you stopped seeking their approval. You simply become honest. If you don't want to do something, you say no. If something bothers you, you address it. If someone repeatedly disrespects you, you create distance. If someone doesn't value your presence, you stop trying to convince them of your value. And when you do this consistently, something interesting happens. Some people will respect you more. Some people will respect you less. Some people will disappear, and that can be painful. But pay attention to who becomes uncomfortable when you begin respecting yourself. Sometimes the people who benefited most from your lack of boundaries are the first people to complain when you develop them. They may say you've changed. They may say you're selfish. They may accuse you of becoming arrogant. They may remind you of how different you used to be. But remember something important. You are not required to remain easy to access simply because someone became accustomed to having unlimited access to you. Growth often looks selfish to people who benefited from your self-neglect. Your job is not to convince them otherwise. Your job is to become honest about what you will and will not accept. There will always be people who misunderstand you. Let them. There will always be people who don't like your decisions. Let them. There will always be people who think they know what is best for your life. Listen if there's something useful, but don't hand them the steering wheel. Because at the end of the day, you are the one who has to live with your decisions, not them. You are the one who has to wake up with your choices. You are the one who carries the consequences. You are the one who knows the private battles that nobody else sees. So stop building your life around the opinions of people who don't have to live it. Your goal isn't to make everyone approve of you. Your goal is to become someone you can respect when you're alone. That means keeping promises to yourself, making decisions that align with your values, walking away when something violates your standards, admitting when you're wrong without collapsing into shame, standing firm when you're right without needing applause, and learning to tolerate the uncomfortable silence that sometimes comes after you stop performing for everyone else. Motivation feels powerful because it creates an emotional rush. You watch something inspiring, hear the right words, imagine the person you could become, and suddenly you feel ready to change everything. You make plans, you set goals, you promise yourself that tomorrow will be different. For a few hours, maybe even a few days, you feel unstoppable. Then the emotion fades, the excitement disappears, and the old habits quietly return. That is where most people lose. They think the problem is that they aren't motivated enough. They search for another video, another quote, another strategy, another burst of inspiration. But motivation was never designed to carry you through an entire life. It is temporary. It depends on emotion, energy, circumstances, sleep, environment, and mood. Discipline operates differently. Discipline says, I will do what I decided to do even when I don't feel like doing it. That single shift can change the way you approach everything. You don't need to feel motivated to wake up early. You don't need to feel motivated to work. You don't need to feel motivated to exercise. You don't need to feel motivated to study. You don't need to feel motivated to stop chasing someone. You don't need to feel motivated to protect your time. You simply need to become someone who follows through. Every time you do something you promised yourself you would do, you create evidence about who you are. That evidence matters. Your mind begins to recognize a pattern. You said you would do it, and you did it. You said you wouldn't return to the old behavior, and you didn't. You said you would finish, and you finished. Eventually, discipline stops feeling like something you're forcing yourself to do and starts becoming part of your identity. This is why small promises matter. You don't need to transform your entire life tomorrow. Start with something simple. If you tell yourself you'll spend 30 minutes working on something important, do it. If you decide you're not going to check your phone for the first hour of the morning, keep that promise. If you say you're going to finish a task before entertainment, finish it. The size of the action matters less than the consistency of keeping your word, because every broken promise teaches your mind something too. If you repeatedly tell yourself you're going to change and repeatedly don't, eventually your own words lose credibility. You stop trusting yourself. You become someone who makes plans but expects yourself to abandon them. Discipline rebuilds that trust. It is not about being perfect. You will have bad days. You will lose focus. You will procrastinate. You will make mistakes. The difference is what happens next. A disciplined person doesn't interpret one bad day as permission to abandon the entire goal. They return, they continue, they adjust, they begin again. This is where many people make a critical mistake. They believe consistency means never failing. It doesn't. Consistency means refusing to let failure become your identity. You can miss one workout and still be disciplined. You can have one unproductive day and still be disciplined. You can make a bad decision and still return to the right path. The key is reducing the amount of time between falling off the path and getting back on it. Discipline also requires learning how to tolerate boredom. This is something most people underestimate. Success is often repetitive. The same habits, the same practice, the same work, the same uncomfortable decisions. There is no constant excitement. There are days when nobody notices. There are days when there is no applause. There are days when you wonder whether anything is happening at all. Those are the days that reveal whether you're dependent on motivation or committed to the process. Anyone can work when they're excited. Anyone can make progress when everything feels easy. The real separation happens when the emotional reward disappears and you continue anyway. You start understanding that discipline is not punishment. It is freedom. When you control your behavior, you become less controlled by your impulses. You don't have to obey every craving. You don't have to respond to every notification. You don't have to chase every opportunity. You don't have to say yes to every request. You don't have to follow every emotion. You can pause. You can choose. You can decide what deserves your energy. And that ability creates a level of internal stability that motivation can never provide on its own. The goal isn't to become a machine without emotions. The goal is to stop making every important decision based on temporary emotions. You can feel tired and still do what matters. You can feel afraid and still move forward. You can feel uncertain and still take the next step. You can feel discouraged and still keep your standards. You can feel uncomfortable and still refuse to return to what you already outgrew. That's how you build a stronger version of yourself, not through one dramatic moment, through hundreds of small decisions that nobody else sees. Every time you choose the difficult thing that serves your future over the easy thing that satisfies your present, you're becoming more capable of controlling your direction. There comes a moment when you have to make a decision that feels simple but carries enormous weight. You are not going back. Not back to the habits that weakened you. not back to the people who repeatedly made you question your worth, not back to the version of yourself that accepted less because you were afraid of being alone, not back to the excuses that kept you comfortable while your potential remained untouched. The hardest part of change is often not knowing what you need to do. Deep down, you usually know. The difficult part is accepting that the old version of your life cannot come with you into the new one. You may have spent years building routines, relationships, identities, and expectations around who you used to be. You learned how to survive a certain environment. You learned how to keep certain people happy. You learned how to avoid conflict, seek approval, chase validation, and stay comfortable. Those behaviors may have protected you at one point, but protection can eventually become limitation. Growth begins when you realize that what once protected you may now be holding you back. You don't have to hate your past to outgrow it. You don't have to regret every decision you made. You don't have to punish yourself for not knowing what you know today. The person you were made decisions with the awareness they had at the time, but now you know more. Now you've seen the consequences. Now you've experienced enough to recognize the patterns. And once you see the pattern, you have a responsibility to stop repeating it. This is where the decision becomes powerful. I'm not going back. It doesn't mean your life will suddenly become easy. It means your response will be different. When someone disrespects you, you don't immediately chase their approval. When something fails, you don't immediately decide that you're a failure. When you're lonely, you don't automatically return to people who hurt you. When you're afraid, you don't automatically retreat. When you're uncertain, you don't surrender your decisions to someone else. You pause, you think, you choose. That's what transformation actually looks like. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes nobody notices. You simply stop responding the way you used to. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop giving unlimited access to people who consistently misuse it. You stop spending hours worrying about things you cannot control. You stop making promises to yourself that you don't intend to keep. You stop waiting for the perfect moment, and slowly your life begins to reflect the decisions you make when nobody is watching. There will be moments when the old version of you tries to return. It will happen when you're tired, when you're lonely, when you feel rejected, when progress seems slow, when someone from your past suddenly returns, when the familiar option feels easier than the right one. That is when your decision is tested, because saying I'm changing is easy when everything feels good. The real test comes when the old behavior becomes tempting again. You don't need to fight the temptation with some dramatic emotional speech. You simply need to remember why you left. Remember the exhaustion. Remember the confusion. Remember the nights you questioned yourself. Remember the promises you made. Remember how much energy you spent trying to make something work that was never working. Merit can become a boundary, not a source of bitterness, but a reminder. You don't need to return to a burning house just because you remember how warm it was inside. Some chapters ended because they were supposed to end. Some doors closed because you were never meant to keep standing in that doorway. Some people left because their role in your life was finished. And some versions of yourself have to disappear because they cannot survive in the future you're building. That can be painful. But pain doesn't always mean you're making the wrong decision. Sometimes pain is simply the price of separation. You're separating from what is familiar. You're separating from what you've known. You're separating from the identity you built around old circumstances. And every separation creates space. Space for better habits, space for clearer thinking, space for healthier relationships, space for meaningful work, space for a stronger identity. You don't need to know exactly what will fill that space immediately. You only need to stop filling it with the same things that created the problem. Give yourself permission to become unfamiliar. You may surprise people. You may even surprise yourself. The person who once needed constant validation may become comfortable with silence. The person who once chased everyone may learn how to walk away. The person who constantly procrastinated may learn how to keep promises. The person who feared being alone may discover that solitude can become a place of strength. And eventually, you'll realize that the decision to not go back was never really about another person, another situation, or another chapter. It was about choosing yourself, choosing your future over your history. Choosing your standards over temporary comfort, choosing growth over familiarity, choosing discipline over impulse, choosing peace over unnecessary chaos. You don't need everyone to understand the decision. You don't need applause. You don't need permission. You need commitment. There will be days when you question yourself, but questioning your decision doesn't mean you have to abandon it. Sometimes uncertainty is simply part of moving into unfamiliar territory. Keep moving, keep building, keep becoming. The past can explain you, but it does not have to control you. Your mistakes can teach you, but they do not have to define you. Your pain can shape you, but it does not have to imprison you. You are allowed to close the door. You are allowed to choose differently. You are allowed to become someone your former self would barely recognize. And when the old life calls you back, remember this. You already know where that road leads. You don't need another lesson. You don't need another warning. You don't need another painful reminder. This time, you can choose the future. This time, you can keep your promise. This time, you can walk forward without looking for permission to become who you were capable of becoming all along.